Qatar, it was a country that doesn't, outside of the World Cup, really have much of a population, right? Like Qatar, the UAE are well known for being countries that are extremely wealthy with a very small indigenous population, right? And so they kind of set up a lot of artificial housing, artificial campsites, and so on for people to engage with the World Cup and so on. So there's a lot less of the risk because you kind of just feel like, oh, the country is like literally catering to you, as opposed to Russia, which was like, yeah, we'll deal with you guys while you're here. But the audiences were amazing. It was kind of this time in history when it felt like everybody was marching to the same beat and it was the right beat.
Right.
If you remember from the news coverage there was a lot of coverage of people waving Palestinian flags, people speaking up for the unity of the Arab world. You had Saudi Arabia had its historic win over Argentina and how everybody was so excited about that. You had Saudi Arabian bloggers saying like, this is not only the time we felt most proud about our country, but the time we felt the most love and support from our neighbors. And to some extent, you could say that was what gave birth to the multi-billion-dollar spending spree of the Saudi government on soccer, because they realized just how powerful it is. And all of those kind of streams of energy, bursts of energy, emerged from that World Cup and made it kind of its own special, magnificent thing. And in 4 years, inshallah, we'll have one in our backyard. I think probably here in Chicago as well.
Yeah. I was looking at the map. I don't know if there's one specifically in Chicago.
Well, I can tell you that there are several in Texas. So if they're not here, then
they'll be in Texas.
Come down and we'll take care of it.
There's one in, I think, Mexico City or...
Dallas has the final, and Mexico City, I think, has several big games as well.
Wow.
So it's all kind of in my neck of the woods.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to talk about the upcoming World Cup, but I guess before we segue into that, did it seem like with the 2022 World Cup that all the, I guess, shenanigans that the Qatari government, such as, finessing the 2022 date, because there some sort of scandal with that? Sure. And then there was also the amount of workers that were working in poor working conditions and dying. Did it feel like everybody just kind of pushed that aside?
We have to kind of take each of these things one by one. FIFA is undoubtedly, I don't think I'm saying anything that controversial here, a fairly corrupt governing body of soccer. It doesn't say the whole thing is rotten or anything, but just to say that it has a long history of scandals and people being bought off by money and so on. So the Qatari World Cup has a questionable kind of history, but honestly, so did the Russian World Cup, so did several World Cups before it, right? So that's like one issue that we put to the side. In terms of workers dying, it is absolutely a tragedy, something that's very sad. It is also something, again, that happens for many World Cups. South Africa had numerous reports of this. Russia didn't have as many reports of workers dying, but it had a lot of reports of stadiums being built in cities that would never use them and that actually needed the money for much more basic needs, such as like food and infrastructure for its people, right? So these are always tough questions to deal with. I undoubtedly, believe that Qatar should take better care of its workers, better care of the people who they bring in to work on, stadium building or other types of these tasks. But I don't think it's a reason to condemn a World Cup, right?
Yeah, I guess I didn't come to the realization that it's happened in so many other World Cups. It seems that all the eyes were at the attention of the Qatar one.
And again, this is something kind of we see a little bit of a repeat now, unfortunately, with some of the coverage of Gaza, Palestine, and Israel, is that there is always a little bit of bias that enters the coverage for these things, right? You might recall before the Qatar World Cup, there was so much coverage about how boycott the Qatar World Cup. They don't respect those who are of a homosexual or bisexual background. Boycott the Qatar World Cup. They told us we could have all the alcohol we wanted, and then they banned it in the last minute, right? And there's always this tension of like, here's how we see Western civilization, And this is, we believe every country, regardless of their own moral code, religion, and so on, should embrace it wholeheartedly, right? And anyone who went there, to be honest, will tell you that there was a beauty in some of the principles that the Qataris stuck to. The fact that there was no alcohol, that's probably the first World Cup that's done that, and it produced a great environment. You know, you had numerous people coming from Western countries who told you that I've never had such a peaceful game day environment. I've never been to a match where there's not a massive brawl because two intoxicated fans have decided to start fighting each other, right? That's a huge benefit. You know, I think I went to 8 games or something. I certainly didn't see any sort of oppression of those who, you know, have a different sexual orientation than myself. Now, that isn't to say that didn't happen, right? I don't want to say just because I didn't see it, it didn't happen, because that kind of logic is used by people incorrectly all the time. But I do think it's blown up a little bit bigger than it is. And I also think there needs to be a respect for a nation's culture and its religion. And I think Qatar was very respectful to its visitors, and I think it deserved the same respect.
Got it. Understood. And then that's where how we get into with 2026, because I know you brought up the fact that throughout previous World Cups, there's also been incidents of bad working conditions and workers unfortunately dying. And it also makes me think back to when the World Cup was in Brazil. There was a picture that was circulating of the nice stadium that was built I think in Rio. Okay. But on the outside of that stadium, it was just people on the streets, and it was just very bad conditions that, you know, instead of putting the money into building this stadium, they could have helped the people around them. And then I think in the sense that where a lot of people heads are at now is, you know, we have a homeless crisis. We have a crisis of, and even if you don't take the crises that America's going through, you think about how bad our public transportation is. And I'm just thinking of all these Europeans and maybe people from Asian countries that have amazing public transit coming into the US and then trying to think that, oh yeah, I'll just catch whatever public transit they have going and go from game to game that way. Mm-hmm. But they're going to be very surprised when they come here and realize that logistically it's not going to work out as easily as they were hoping.
I agree, but you know, money has a magical way of solving a lot of problems. You know, there's a saying, it's like money can't buy happiness, but it can make a lot of things much easier. Right. And so, you know, I do think the transportation problem's a little overblown, right? When I went to Russia, yeah, they had public transport. It wasn't that good. You know, I wasn't in South Africa, but it's a country that, you know, outside of a few cities, is not well connected, yeah. And they figured it out, right? Brazil, also a massive country, don't really know much about their public transport. They figured it out. You know, I think that if your intention is to kind of just like go all around the country catching every single game day after day, you might have some trouble. But if you're planning to cover, you know, the games that are concentrated within Texas, you're going to figure out how to jump on a bus, a Von Lane, a Greyhound. You know, have I shouted out all the transportation companies yet?
You forgot Flixbus. You forgot Megabus.
There we go. You know, you'll figure it out. So, you know, there's always a long list of logistical issues that have to be solved. I mean, Qatar literally had to build like 10,000 homes, you know, and they figured it out. They said, all right, why not? We'll build them. No one's going to live in them after, because literally probably like a ghost town now. But they got it done, and so will the U.S. undoubtedly, and Canada and Mexico.